Hold on to your chair because you're about to witness something that hasn't happened on this channel in a long time. Take a look at this. A Chinese launch with a combustion engine. Yes, an internal combustion engine, as the industry calls it now. This is the GAC GS3, which is set to be a volume model for GAC in Brazil to be manufactured here. Do you know where? Over there in Catalão at the HPE factory, which has already churned out, so to speak. Mitsubishi's and Suzuki's, it will have an installed capacity of up to 50,000 units per year. The plans are ambitious. The brand expects to have 100,000 cars on the road in Brazil by 2030. And 2030 is an interesting year to explain why GAC is one of the first Chinese companies to bring cars here in many years. Right? A pure internal combustion car is because of the market. According to the brand, in 2030 it will be the time when pure internal combustion cars and electrified cars, whether hybrids or fully electric, will reach about 50-50. In Brazil, half and half. In other words, even 4 years from now, traditional internal combustion cars will still represent half of the new car market in Brazil. And more than that, until 2030 and 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029. And as the niche, or rather the segment of internal combustion cars in Brazil keeps shrinking, it still remains largely dominant. GAC, of course, wants to compete for volume in this, precisely in one of the most important segments of the current Brazilian market when it comes to retail, which is the compact SUV. Yes, the GS3 comes to compete with T-Cross, Tracker, HR-V, Kicks, and Kite. Who else am I forgetting? Anyway, Fiat Fastback, Jeep Renegade. By the way, you can see that I'm mentioning models from two different tiers of this segment because the car is divided into two versions. We have the elite version, this one right here. Look, it has 19-inch wheels, Michelin Sport tires. This one's the one to get for 160 grand. And the entry-level premium version, which doesn't have the big panoramic roof. Here, the result of a lot of dieting and training. It has fewer driver assistance features, a slightly simpler interior, a slightly simpler sound system. There's no rear air vent. Anyway, that kind of thing that honestly won't really change your life much. It's going for 129,900 at launch, but its regular price is 139,900, so that's a difference of 20 to 30,000 reais. And it's a very well-designed car aesthetically, right? A very sophisticated look, as GAC cars usually have. You've already seen the GS4, right? It's a mid-size SUV here on the channel. And also that traditional refined interior of Chinese cars. This two-tone interior looks really nice, right? That's right. There are two interior options here. This caramel and black or all black. That traditional dual-screen interior. But the integration is really well done here, right? At least the cluster screen is inside the dashboard. It's not sticking out like in most Chinese cars. Notice that only the center section of the cluster is TFT. Here, look, the screen is smaller, right? Here we have a tachometer, temperature, and fuel gauge. The fuel consumption, well, the consumption isn't impressive, right? It's not spectacular after all. It's a combustion car. The fuel consumption is around 11 kilometers per liter combined according to InMetro, but this car isn't about fuel efficiency. Its main selling point is performance. Just look at the engine, a 1.5 turbo with intercooler and high pressure injection. It has 170 horsepower and 25 kN of torque. That means it goes from 0 to 100 in 8.1 seconds, right? That's faster than the T-Cross 1.4, the Fastback 1.3, basically the main performance benchmarks in this segment. Another really interesting thing, as you can see here, we have driving modes, Eco, Comfort, and a Sport mode, which turns everything here red. And besides that, you also have it on the gear shift itself, right? An S mode on the gear shift, so is that how you get all this performance out of the car? I'm feeling it here, check this out, let's take it out of drive, because leaving it in drive in enclosed spaces is always a bad idea. I'm feeling a cool breeze from this elite version, but I couldn't tell where it was from. Turns out, it's the smart ventilation. There's a seat icon right here. Sometimes, the interfaces in Chinese cars make us work, right? I would prefer a physical button, but it's a unique feature in this segment, right? Not many compact SUVs in Brazil can cool your butt. The look is pretty aggressive, right? Take a look at this sculpted side mirror, the DTS sound, right? Sound. In this top trim, like a good Chinese SUV, it has a 2.65 meter wheelbase, right? It prioritizes space here in the back seat you have a flat floor, which isn't so common in combustion cars. You're seeing a bit of how the sausage is made, right? This is necessary so our cameraman can film from there to here in the previous shot. And we forgot to lift the seat here, air vent here in the back seat, USB port. A pretty decent space for a compact SUV, even though its dimensions are almost close to some mid-size SUVs, right? Over 4.40 meters in length. Here in the back is where you really see the boldness and joy of the design, right? Take a look at how sculpted this taillight is. And then the usual story, right? Typical of the Chinese market. A roomy rear seat sometimes results in a less roomy trunk. We're talking about only 371 liters here, right? Is that a trunk? That's on the lower end for compact SUVs. And it's not a very usable space, right? Because this more aggressive slope of the rear window, which is really nice aesthetically, right? It takes away what would be this space up here, right? Bigger items? Looking at the size of the trunk cover here, you get a pretty good idea, right? How the space ends up a bit more limited. It also has a power liftgate in this top-of-the-line version of the GAC GS3 GS or GAC. That is the question. And here, under the hood, let's take a closer look. This 1.5 turbo, as I mentioned, right? 170 horsepower, 25 kilogram meters of torque next cycle, right? It does 0 to 100 in 8.1 seconds, and the fuel consumption reaches 11.6. On the highway, interesting, right? We see an intercooler here on top of the engine, which isn't very common in this segment. And with high pressure injection, the thermal efficiency of this engine reaches 40%. That's a characteristic of GAC vehicles. Even GAC electric cars stand out a lot in terms of efficiency, right? They usually have pretty impressive range for the size of their battery. Now this bold look, kind of Lamborghini Urus style, the Anabi here on the outside, these 19-inch wheels, these Michelin sport tires, all promise sportiness when driving. Will they deliver? Settle in there with that big roof, the result of a lot of dieting and training? Let's find out. So, how does it drive, Congressman? Here we go. Real world. Television, real talk. I'm leaving GAC. Yeah. From Villa Leopoldina here, right? People call it Villa Lobos. That's just like real estate agents in Sao Paulo, right? Every apartment in Villa Sonia is actually called Morumbi, right? People like to call places on this side of CAGSP Villa Lobos because it's next to the park, right? But it's actually Villa Leopoldina. It's a bit less upscale, let's say, in the real estate world, but it's impressive, right? Ooh. Especially in this top spec version here with the caramel interior option, right? You have these two interior options. Wind direction. I wanted to lower the fan speed. It's missing, right? There's a button missing. Oh, here it is, just not clearly marked. Now I see it. I was complaining without checking. But that's unusual, right? A fan speed control. Like this, as if it were an on-off switch. You can't see it, of course, right? But it goes click, click, click here. You can feel how responsive this little switch is, right? It's shaped like a switch, yeah, but as I was saying, look, that's one of the problems. Rafa Borges, our friend, a kiss. Rafa Borges did one. On the same day I was recording the Tank 300, I mentioned this in the Tank 300 video, and I saw Rafa Borges' video about it. I think it's a problem that has arrived in Brazil. First with lane watch from Honda, and the GWM has it, the GAC has it too. I turn on the blinker and I lose the map, right? For me, since I'm local here in Zioma, it's not a problem, right? Because I know my way around very well. But mainly, for example, if you're at a roundabout and you don't know exactly which exit to take, wow, that's not good. I think the average Chinese person must struggle a lot in traffic. In the case of the GWM, you don't even need to use the turn signal, right? Just by sensing something nearby, it already activates a camera and you lose the map. The map? No. Chinese automakers always keep the map. The map is important. But let's get back to our topic here. Yeah, I was talking, right? Can you see the light shining on my forehead here? This elite version with 160 points comes with the big panoramic sunroof, the result of a lot of diet and training. And like I said, there are two combinations of interior colors, right? This caramel and black and an all black one. And 5 combinations of exterior colors, 5 options for exterior colors. and you can mix and match them however you like, right? All the interiors, both interiors with the 5 exteriors. My knowledge of math and humanities tells me that makes 10 options. So it's not clear if this applies to both versions, is it? But if it does, then we have 20 possible combinations of GACs and GS3S GAC go and change, right? Our second appearance of a GAC here on the channel, and let's put those 170 horsepower and 25 kilos of torque to work through the transmission. It took a little while to understand that it was what I wanted. But you've already seen the GS4 here, which is the midsize SUV, right? Now we're in the compact SUV, even though it's a compact SUV with pretty generous dimensions, right? Over 4.40 meters. But I talk about this a lot there. In the GS4 video, I recommend you watch it to see how GAC has a history, a timeline, a brand identity, a little different from other Chinese automakers that are booming in the Brazilian market today, like BYD. Now, yes, we can really feel how strong the turbo direct injection engine is with intercooler, right? But as I was saying in the GS4 video, we talk a lot about that history. GAC made a lot of technical partnerships, right? Joint ventures, mainly with Toyota. So it has unlike BYD, which has a profile more similar to Tesla, right? They didn't know it was impossible, so they did it by following a unique path. Especially when it moved into the electrification phase, which is what Chinese automakers call new energy, right? Electrification. GAC was always very, strict, very regulated, benchmarking against Western automakers, which is also a bit of Geely's approach, right? They bought Volvo, bought Smart, and learned from Western companies instead of creating their own unique path. And then we have a slightly different culture. For example, mid-throttle response was really emphasized here at the launch event. It's pretty smart. When you floor it, it takes a little while, right? Calibration to save fuel, that's right. Are you sure you can't change your mind there? Oh, you keep the screen down? Now that's it. But that's exactly what was really emphasized here at the launch event. How much the car was adapted for local conditions, how much GAC invested in research and development to adapt the car to Brazilian preferences. And one of the things that Brazilians have a very different taste for, look, and it goes for the left too, it's not just to the right that we lose our navigation here. But Brazilians have this characteristic. There are a lot of Brazilians, right? The average Brazilian consumer likes strong throttle response. Something that the average Chinese person who drives in a more relaxed way doesn't care about as much. Of course, if you tune it to be more responsive, you lose fuel efficiency, right? You worsen fuel efficiency, so the Chinese GS3 is probably less of a gas guzzler. Let's do this. Traffic on the expressway just got a bit heavier. Once we're back on the Bandeirantes highway, we'll continue talking and really let this guy stretch his legs. Now, yes, full power from 0 to 100. Look how long it takes to get going. We can't go all out because we need to leave some space for the dwarf. The HB20 just passed by. Look, I'll show you again here. Look, we're here. I put the transmission in sport mode, right? Which is the only driving mode it has. So here it's 70, I stepped on it. It's tuned so it doesn't do a downshift, right? It takes advantage of the 25 kg of torque to pick up speed, right? Now it did a downshift. We're talking about a VCT transmission, right? Wet dual clutch, to the joy of the Brazilian automotive internet, 7-speed. It's missing a little pedal, right? So we could enjoy the 170 horsepower, 25 kilos of torque. Also here, with this lever, in the Porsche 911 style. There's no way to shift manually. You can also see the lane keeping assistant, hysterically Chinese style there in the background. The cluster has a particular feature, right? And well, I like the exterior design, right? I already mentioned it, but it's a very elaborate design, both outside and inside. Take a look. I don't know if you can see what this is here. The outline of the side mirror. It looks like a Lamborghini, right? A Urus, something like that. Extremely sharp and elaborate, and that's really cool. Today I liked it and was pleased with the car's look, but there's always some hesitation, right? It's a look that tends to be less timeless, that ages faster. And here on the inside, that catches my attention, right? We have the TFT screen here on the digital cluster. It's high definition and it's only in the central part. Here and then on the sides, we have a tachometer and one here. Temperature and range, right? Fuel is not part of the TFT screen, right? No? So we end up with two different fonts, right? You get this radio style digital clock font here on the tachometer and then the high definition TFT font on the speedometer. These are things that Western premium brand designers would hardly let slide. But here it gets a pass. You get this angular look, a bit like a Lamborghini or the previous gen BMW 3 Series, which I also don't like much, but I understand why it's there. Because the outline here, these angular shapes fall exactly within the steering wheel, right? So you get a perfect view of the information without the steering wheel blocking it, even though it's a very sporty steering wheel, right? It has a good grip, a small steering wheel with perforated leather. Here, where you hold it, there's this thumb rest here. Why does this rest exist? Oh, it's to make it comfortable to hold like this, isn't it? This is something really typical of a race car, right? It's a high performance car. It's because of the way you get high sensitivity on the steering wheel, right? You might notice in the videos that I don't drive like this, nor do I race like this. Almost always my hands are in this position here. This is exactly for you to rest your thumb. Because you have more of your hand on the steering wheel, and then you have more sensitivity for tiny adjustments. So this type of steering wheel design always signals that the car has performance aspirations. Not only that, but also the marker in the center part here, even though it's the same color and the flat base, right? It's almost like an Audi RS3 steering wheel here, relatively speaking. And as I'm talking, you can see how the car really picks up speed, right? There's definitely plenty of power here in this quick test drive. Here on the Bandeirantes highway, we won't feel much of the chassis dynamics, but when changing lanes like this, you can feel it, right? Is it that typical Chinese setup, really soft? The suspension isn't really aiming for a sporty feel, right? You change lanes here a bit more aggressively, your head just wants to keep going straight, right? Because the chassis movement isn't that controlled, it prioritizes comfort, right? Doesn't it? You can't really criticize a manufacturer that in the compact SUV segment goes for a fastback setup. Here it's a bit more direct. There's another one that also has this vibe, right? It's not just the Chinese, they prefer comfort, which is important, right? GAC really emphasized that point, and they say GAC, but I think in the real world, people are just going to call it GAC more and more, right? Does this 8.1 second 0 to 100 time make it the fastest compact SUV in Brazil? So, compared to the main competitors, right? It's a better number, isn't it? It's the most impressive power figure, right? The 1.3 turbo engines from Stellantis, like the fastback Renegade itself, have 185 horsepower on ethanol. But they use a torque converter transmission, right? And what about EAB? Who likes to throw his fits regarding the glorious transmission? A dual clutch transmission, which is my favorite setup, but honestly a DCT really demands a lot. A little pedal here, look, I got right up behind this Corolla. I'm in 7th gear here, bam. I wanted to downshift to 6th by myself, but it doesn't let me. That's how it is. But so, Stellantis engines have 15 more horsepower. The dual clutch transmission makes better use of the power off the line, right? It also gives better acceleration, even without knowing the car's weight, correct? The detailed technical specs haven't been released yet today, but in this first drive, right? The GS3 is a pleasant companion for the open road out here. And you saw a little bit of us getting into some city traffic, right? Let's do this. Let's do what my dad used to say. The hassle here on the Bandeirantes highway, go back, get into a bit of Sao Paulo traffic to also show the car a little in the stop and go of the city. Then we'll come back with our final conclusions. And you can see that it has an automatic windshield wiper sensor. There are more than 10 ADAS features, including lane keeping assist, LKA, emergency brake warning, EBD, and more. They really like acronyms, that's how the ADAS people are. But when it comes to technology and things the car does by itself, I think the rain sensor for the wipers is one of the few features that are really welcome. But let's do this, let's head into city traffic. make a U-turn, and then we'll come back with our final thoughts. From this first contact with a car that really underpins big ambitions, GAC in Brazil, right? By 2030, they're already talking about 100,000 cars in the country, production in Catalão for up to 50,000 units per year. A promise is a promise. So on our way back, look like, oh, it leans a little in the corners, doesn't it? But like I said, right, that's what you expect from the vast majority of cars in this segment, right? Now getting on, we took the Bandeirantes, we're going to exit through the Anhanguera. It's excellent. Test, right? For rough road surfaces, do you want to see an example of a bad road surface here? São Paulo, my God. It's this Anhanguera ramp. You know how it is, right? They privatized the highway, charge a toll. The highway is in good condition, but the stretch between the highway and the side road, the marginal, is the responsibility of the city hall. It ends up in no man's land, abandoned, right? And it turns into a real dump. Look, guys, it's in sport mode here, and I still think at times that it's a little slow to respond, right? The calibration here of the transmission from GAC, Guangzhou Automotive Group, not company, right? GAC, that's it, or corporation, right? Is it? It's just like the Volkswagens, right? If you leave it in normal, look, in D, my God, you have enough time to sing the first verse of the national anthem. D is like S, guys, always use S. And now let's focus on the steering in sport mode. Now we can evaluate. Look, like I was saying, there's not even any road markings, right? We can see how the GAC handles the potholes on our streets. Remember, this is the top of the line version, right? It has really big wheels, low profile tires. The rims are nice too, I think, on the Elite version. Yeah, it made it. In the test here, it didn't show any unusual vibrations, nothing that would go against the quality of the product. And now we're going through a period, for you who aren't from São Paulo, that is, like this, the first half of March, when classes start again, the city practically collapses. People are like, look, but the first ones here in S, in urban traffic, are really, really eager, just like you say in English, but it's a give and take, a give and take. It's total chaos, because there are people who were using their cars during school vacation, and it takes some time to adapt, right? So it probably is. These are the two worst times for traffic in São Paulo, right? It's the start of vacation there in December, when everyone starts doing everything by car, and the end of vacation when this new wave of cars is thrown into the traffic. And the city takes some time to adapt. Let's do this. Since we're stuck anyway, let's go to our final conclusions. So, in the studio, final conclusions. The situation is really tough, isn't it? We're here at this dealership in Vila Leopoldino, which used to be a GAC dealership, right? That was kind of the first wave of Chinese brands in Brazil. Now it's become the flagship, right? The concept store is part of what's considered a second wave of very big, well-structured players, right? When we look at BYD, Geely, GWM, GAC, we're talking about conglomerates that are, for example, in the case of GAC, it's written right there. The GAC Group, it's the 181st largest company in the world, part of the famous Fortune 500, right? The list of the 500 largest companies in the world. In other words, these guys mean business, they're here to stay, they're coming to set up local manufacturing, and they want to scale fast. And that helps explain why the GS3 comes with this engine, combustion, which at the end of the day is still the best way for you to have a car with a competitive price and after-sales support at scale, right? Where it doesn't shine so much is in fuel consumption. But it's going to be much easier, I imagine, for GAC to convert someone who's considering a Tracker, a T-Cross, a Nivus, and I'm mentioning these three names for a reason. Do you know why? Because right next door there's a Volkswagen dealership, and right after that a Chevrolet one. And when the launch event started here, I noticed the Volkswagen saleswomen next door doing this, looking over, right? How strong is this new competitor going to be? and it's aimed directly at two of Volkswagen's biggest breadwinners in Brazil today, specifically the T-Cross and the Nivus. It also needs to be flex fuel, right? When this consumer starts crunching the numbers. But I always applaud when a car manufacturer comes up with a slightly different proposal in a segment, right? A compact SUV is very much associated with a slightly more conservative consumer, right? Because these are high volume cars. They have to please a lot of people. There's no doubt that the design of the GS3 won't please everyone. It's clearly targeting those who are more interested in something more aggressive, maybe even a younger consumer profile. I like the look. I'm really curious, you know? Usually in my final thoughts, I make some kind of prediction about how this car will sell, how it will be received by consumers in Brazil. And my current prediction is, well, I kind of don't know, you know? There are 60 GAC dealerships planned in Brazil this year, and they're also expected to surpass 100 by 2030. And I think this car here will be a key factor. It will be decisive. In practice, you, the consumer, the acceptance you give to this car will really set the tone, right? For GAC's expansion plan in Brazil, whether they will actually reach those 100 dealerships and 100,000 cars in 2030? Tell us what you think in the comments. What's your opinion? Where does this guy fit in the pecking order of the highly competitive Brazilian compact SUV segment? Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel. That always helps us a lot. As always, thank you so much. Take care and a big hug.